understand the quadratic formula. So by the conclusion of this, you should be able to do some problems. What you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to obviously use this formula, find out if there's two answers, one answers, or no answers whatsoever. And we're going to go back to thinking about the basics. I want to do a real quick review with you before we start moving into the actual quadratic formula. So before, we've done solving quadratics like this. And if you think about this one, you always had to think of the factors of 24 that added up to a negative 11. For me, I like this process. It was pretty easy. I automatically thought of negative 3 and negative 8. Then I set them equal to 0, and I got an answer of 3 and 8. So a problem like this, that if I was to use the quadratic formula, you're going to understand what the discriminant is in a moment. You're going to realize I'm going to figure out I have two answers. I do the quadratic formula, and I will get both answers. Then there's also a problem like this, where you had x squared plus 8x plus 16. You had to think of what factors of 16 that add up to 8. If you're able to do the factoring, you saw x plus 4 times x plus 4 is equal to 0. Basically, you said x plus 4 equals 0, and you got an answer of negative 4. So when you're doing the quadratic formula, you are going to find situations like this that only have one answer. So let's get into what the quadratic formula is and what is the discriminant. Quadratic formula, if you notice right up here, it's going to be a negative b plus or minus. So that means that you're going to take the square root of a number and you are going to add it to the opposite of your b, and you're also going to subtract it from the opposite of your b. You will also divide it by 2a. So a couple of minor things I would like to do is I like to write out my a, b, and c right off the bat, so that I can start plugging in there and I don't get confused with what goes where. The one thing that we're going to talk about is the discriminant. If you notice this color right here with the discriminant, maybe I will try to highlight it for us. This right here is going to tell us how many answers we have. If the possibility is that we have the discriminant right here greater than 0, and usually a lot of the times they're going to be perfect squares on the first couple easy ones that you start off with. That means you're going to have two answers. That means that if you would actually look at a graph of this quadratic, it's going to cross the x-axis twice, two different locations, and that would be your answers. If you find out that the discriminant is equal to 0, that means it's only going to cross the x-axis in one spot. Kind of like that last example I did where you had minus 4. That means that the vertex would be right there at negative 4. Then also, if you get the possibility that your discriminant right here is less than 0, and it could be opening upwards or downwards, that it does not touch the x-axis. So you have three different situations. You have a situation right here where you are going to have two answers because it's greater than 0. You're going to have one answer. That's when it is equal to 0. And if you get a negative square root, that means it is not touching the x-axis. Doesn't matter if it's opening upwards or downwards, but it's not going to touch the x-axis. So with a little bit of practice, you're going to get familiar with that. I do like this activity that a teacher did use where they talked about one real root, two, and they're giving you the pictures and also the equations. So you would have to do some work. And if you notice, like on this one right here, looks like it's only touching the x-axis once, so it'd be one real root. So let's get into some of the examples right here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I got it equal to 0. This is the ones I consider a little bit easier when they already have them equal to 0. I'm going to identify my a, b, and c right off the bat, so that then when I start using the formula, I realize what I got. So my a is 1. My b is a negative 2, and my c is a negative 3. What I'm going to realize is that I'm going to be using the formula right here, and the first goal I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to figure out how many answers I do have. So first thing is I'm going to kind of look at my formula. Opposite of b. My b is a negative 2. So right off the bat, the opposite of that is 2. I got to get familiar with this plus or minus because, I got to get familiar with that because it's going to be a plus or a minus, and then the answers that are in here. So I'm going to start off with my b squared, and negative 2. If I'm using a calculator, I'm definitely going to do a negative 2 squared minus 4. My a is 1, so I'm going to put a 1 in there. And then I'm also going to put a negative 3. And we'll put this over 2a, and my a is 1, so this is one of the easier ones. So I've plugged it in the formula. I got to start figuring out how many answers I do have. So right here, my discriminant is going to tell me how many different answers there are. I'm going to see if I can do this on the calculator and see what I get. So I started off here, and I have a negative 2. So I've got to make sure that I use my parentheses. And I'm going to use a negative button, 2, use my parentheses. I will then square it. And then I'm going to go, well, minus 4. Always going to have a 4 in there. Times 1, and I don't necessarily type it in there, but I will. And also a negative 3. And when I hit enter, I get an answer of 16. So what does that tell me? That tells me that it's larger than 0, so I should have 2 answers. It's going to cross the y-axis in 2 different spots here. So when I start simplifying this a little bit, I will actually go into getting a pen right here, and I'm going to realize I'm going to take 2 plus or minus the square root of 16 divided by 2. So in actuality, I can kind of get rid of the square root right here. So I'm going to take 2 plus or minus, well, what's the square root of 16? I believe it's 4. And I'm going to divide that answer by 2. So I'm going to get 2 different situations right here. I'm going to get 2, let's do the plus. I like to do the plus first. Plus 4 divided by 2. Well, what is 2 plus 4? 2 plus 4 is, I believe, 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So one of my answers is going to be x equals 3. I'm also going to have another answer. My other answer is going to be when I take 2, this time 2 minus 4, and I divide by 2. So what is 2 minus 4? That is a negative 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 is a negative 1. So notice when we started this, we already knew that we were going to have 2 answers, and I did get 2 answers. And if I'm going to make a mistake, I'm probably going to make it with the negatives right here. So 2 minus 4 is negative 2 divided by 2 is a negative 1. Okay, so I actually did right. So that's an example that has 2 answers. I'm going to try this example right here, and from factoring a lot off this, I know that I'm only going to get 1 answer. If you look at this one, let's start off with our A, B, and our C. Our A is 1, not too bad. Our B is 8, and our C is 16. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually plug this into this right here, and I'm going to remember that I got to go in the opposite of my B. So the opposite of my B is a negative 8. I'm always going to do this plus or minus. I'm going to do B squared, that's 8 squared, and then my A is 1, and my C is 16. Then I'm going to have it over 2 times my A value. Okay, so again right here, I want to try to predict how many answers I had. I kind of predicted that there was going to be 1. So let me see if I am correct on this one right here. I will get my calculator out, and I want to say that I was doing, I believe, was it 8 squared? And I don't really have to use the parentheses, but I am going to use the parentheses this time. Minus 4. I believe my A was 1 this time, and then also my C was 16. When I figure out this answer, I get 0. If I get an answer of 0, that means it's touching the vertex. It only has 1 answer. So I'm going to anticipate 1 answer today. So what do? I've got a negative 8 here. Negative 8 plus or minus, didn't I say 0 up here? So I am going to get a 0. I'm going to divide by 2 over 1. Well, this is only going to give me one possibility. I'm not going to have the other possibility, because if you think about it, if I start off with a negative 8 and I add 0, that's the same thing as if I minus 0. And then I'm going to have it divided by 2. And what is my possibility? Well, let's go down to just one answer. My x is going to be negative 4, because I am going to have, I'm going to have a negative 8 on the top of 2. And when I divide those two, I get a negative 4. So again, I predicted one answer, and I came up with exactly just one answer on this one right here, because the discriminant was equal to 0. So we started off with some easy ones that had the a is equal to 1. Now we're going to move into a couple different situations. This one right here, it has a value to be 3, so it's going to be a different possibility. Looking at it right now, I'm not too sure how many answers I'm going to get, so I have to kind of like play around with it. And I'm going to look at my A, B, and C. And I've got 3, my B is negative 2, and my C is 2. Okay, so again, I'm going to plug this into the formula right here. I'm going to do the opposite of my B. And with the opposite of my B, I believe that is 2. I'm going to go plus or minus. And then I am going to do, B squared, and that is negative 2 squared. And then my A is 3. And my C is 2. And that is all going to be over 2A. Okay, so I'll get to this in a minute, but I got to look at this discriminant again. It's going to tell me how many answers I am going to have. Am I going to have 2, 1, or none at all? So again, I grab my calculator, and I should be able to do this in my head, but I like to double check on this one right here. So what did I have? I had a negative 2 squared, so I'm going to go negative 2, and then I'm going to square it, and I'm going to go minus 4 times 3 times 2. Now I think I'm going to get a negative right here, because this is only going to give me 4. I get a negative 20. So what does that mean? That means that I'm not going to have any answers on this one right here, because what did I say? It was a negative 20. You cannot take the square root of a negative number. You will learn about that in probably like an algebra 2. So on this one, it is not going to have any solutions. If you were doing the quadratic formula, you'd have a negative 20 in here. And we're not going to be doing that. So this one has no solution. And there's a lot of websites out there that you can type these in, and they can actually give you the answers to these. This is a nice way to check to see if you're doing them right. So one more before I have you try some examples right here. Here's an easy example right here. I'm kind of stuck. I'm going to think that C is 2. But is this equal to 0? Now, that's the only thing I have to double check. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides. Got to get this equal to 0. How am I going to do that? Go back to your basic algebra skills, and you're going to subtract 2 on both sides. So now you're going to have 5x squared minus 2 is equal to 0. What's your a value? Your a value is going to be 5. Your b value is a negative 9, and your c value is a negative 2. So common easy mistake is maybe students not getting it set equal to 0. Always make sure that you got 0 right here, which we do. And then you can identify your a, b, and c. So start doing this in here, and after a while this will get a little easier. You don't have to look at the formula. But let's look at the formula. Take the opposite of my b. What's the opposite of b? Well, the opposite of negative 9 is 9. Then I'm going to add and subtract, and I'm always going to take, my b squared? So my negative 9 squared, and you should be thinking that 81 in your head already. We're always going to subtract 4. My a is 5. And my c is a negative 2. Well, I'm going to divide this by twice my a value, which is 5. Okay, so again, I'm going to have to grab my calculator. And this time, let's type in negative 9. I'm going to square it. I'm going to go minus 4 times 5 times, I'm going to use the negative button, 2. Let's see what I get. I get 121. Okay, nice thing about this is 121 is a perfect square. It's larger than 0, so that means I'm going to get 2 answers. So as I go into this and actually start doing some work, I'm starting to think about my 9. That's what I started off with earlier. And then I'm going to do plus or minus. So let me do plus or minus. And I believe we had 121 right here was the discriminant. And then I have 2 times 5, and I believe 2 times 5 is 10. So all I have to do now is take my 9, and I'm going to add or subtract. I believe it's 11. And then when I'm done with this, I'm going to divide it by 10. So I have 2 situations right here. My first one is taking 9. This time, let me add 11 to it and divide it by 10. And if I did this, I should be able to get 9 plus 11 is, I believe, 20. So I've got 20, and I'm dividing by 10. Well, what is 20 divided by 10? It's 2. So one of my answers is going to be x equals 2. So that's one answer. And if I remember correctly, I'm going to get 2 answers on this one. So the next time I do this, instead of doing 9 plus 11, I'm going to go 9 minus 11. And when I'm doing this 9 minus 11, I've got to think about this. Let me see. 9 minus 11, that is a negative 2. And negative 2 over 10. So it is a possibility to get a fraction occasionally. And then, again, I'm going to double check, make sure I didn't make any mistakes. And so my other possibility is x equals a negative 1/5. So I have not 1, but 2 answers. One of the answers is x equals 2, and x equals a negative 1/5. Of course, if we had a little bit more time, I would punch this in here, and I'd go 5 times 2 squared minus 9 times 2 should equal 2. If I did 5 times 1/5 squared minus 9 times 1/5, it again would equal 2. But for time purposes, we're just worried about how many answers and the correct answers. So the 2 I would like you to try is the first one, is x squared plus 6x plus 9. You already have it equal to 0, so you should be able to find your a, b, and c. And I'll probably type in some answers right here to see what you're going to get. And then the second example I'd like you to do is x squared minus 5x plus 20 equals 0. So you should, again, be able to find a, b, and c. Find out how many answers you're going to have, and once you find out how many answers, you should be able to solve it using the quadratic. So a couple quick reminders. Make sure that you kind of have that quadratic formula written down as you're trying these, and good luck.